Tonight, another senior Conservative questions the Prime Minister's plans to cut taxes for the highest earners as the party gathers in Birmingham. Liz Truss now says the mini-budget could have been better handled, but says there will be no U-turn on the scale of the tax cuts.
I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act, but I do accept we should have laid the ground better.
Let's not muddy the water with this other thing, this tax cut for wealthy people right now, when the priority needs to be on everyday households.
We'll be looking at the government's signals on spending cuts and at a new week ahead on the financial markets. Also tonight, Indonesia mourns the 125 people lost in a stampede during a football match. On the front line in eastern Ukraine as its soldiers battle for every inch of territory.
We have to be careful here. We've been told there is a Russian sniper operating from that direction. For the troops here, this is a grind, day and night, a hard battle to hold this position.
And they came in all shapes, sizes and costumes. More than 40,000 runners have taken part in this year's London Marathon. Good evening. The government should have laid the ground better before unveiling its plan for major tax cuts. That's what the Prime Minister admitted today, acknowledging the turmoil on the financial markets that followed the mini-budget 9 days ago. She did, however, defend its content, including removing the top rate of income tax for the highest earners. Tonight, another prominent Conservative has questioned that policy as the party gathers in Birmingham for its annual conference. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is there. Chris.
The first party conference for a new leader is meant to be a celebratory affair, even in a difficult time for the country, something of a victory lap. And yet here we are for Liz Truss at her first conference. And tonight, a second former cabinet minister tells this programme that they think her plans are misguided. And more than that, Grant Shapp tells us that 45p tax rate being got rid of for the highest earners will not command a majority of support in the House of Commons and so is doomed to fail. Now, it's worth saying that those who are speaking out publicly against Liz Truss at the moment are those who did not back her for the leadership in the first place. But they are illustrative of a deeper well of private anguish here. Liz Truss facing the music, smile for the cameras. This is what close scrutiny looks like when you are a Prime Minister and Chancellor, especially after the week they've had. A penny for what their whispered small talk was about after their big joint decisions had huge consequences. Earlier in a BBC interview, the Prime Minister's first acknowledgement that she'd made mistakes.
I do want to say to people, I understand their worries about what has happened this week, and I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act, but I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
One element of the budget plans that angers many Conservative MPs is the tax cut for the very highest earners. And so there's an obvious question.
Are you absolutely committed to abolishing the 45p tax rate for the wealthiest people in the country?
Yes. And it is part, Laura, it is part of an overall package of making our tax system simpler and lower. But I think it's worth noting, in the package we announced, the vast majority of that package is the energy package.
An energy package costing billions, but overshadowed by the tax cuts.
Did you discuss scrapping the top rate with your whole cabinet?
No. No, we didn't. It was a decision that the Chancellor made.
Cabinet isolated from what was coming, a Prime Minister isolated after what came next. Market turmoil and the pound plunging almost as fast as the confidence of Conservative MPs. Watching with his verdict on what he'd heard, a familiar face. no fan of Liz Truss, who is still not convinced.
The sheer risk of using borrowed money to fund tax cuts, that is not conservative. To have as your principal decision the headline tax move, cutting tax for the wealthiest, that is a display of the wrong values.
It's not unusual for left-wing protesters to rather noisily articulate their opposition to the Conservatives outside their conference. But what's striking this year is there are blunt voices of opposition to the Prime Minister inside too. Tonight, another intervention from another former Cabinet Minister who told me the cut in tax for the richest is so unpopular, MPs will reject it.
The problem is, and I noticed this talking to my constituents this weekend, that what they're seeing is money being borrowed in order to fund tax cuts for the better off, whilst they themselves are having to, for example, take on a second shift, another job, in order to pay for the rise in interest rates and mortgage rates. But let's not muddy the water with this other thing, this tax cut for wealthy people right now, when the priority needs to be on everyday households.
In your judgment, will the Prime Minister be able to get these budgetary measures through the House of Commons?
No, unfortunately, and really this is the backstop. I don't think the House is in a place where it's likely to support that.
How helpful is it to intervene publicly now, so soon after a new Prime Minister's taken office?
I mean this to be entirely helpful. There's a way through this, but the way through isn't to put fingers in the ear, tin ears, and just push on.
Not yet a month in the job, Liz Truss's first party conference as Prime Minister is anything but a honeymoon. In the next few days here, she'll need to douse her party and the country in bucketfuls of reassurance. Chris Mason, BBC News in Birmingham.
Well, we are still 7 weeks away from the date given by the government to set out how it plans to lower public debt. Today, Liz Truss didn't rule out cuts in public spending. The global financial markets are just beginning a new trading week, and tomorrow the Chancellor will address the Conservative Party conference. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, is here in the studio. Does it make a difference that she did have this acknowledgement today that the mini-budget could have been handled better?
Yeah, I think that acknowledgement also contains within it an implicit admission that the mini-budget, that there was a connection, at least in part, between the mini-budget and the chaos we saw on markets last week. And that's closer to the consensus thinking in markets and in economics that hard numbers were needed. But this does also raise some challenges because hard numbers need some clear policies. And we also heard from the Prime Minister that there wouldn't be any tax rises to fill any fiscal holes, that they want growth to do some of the job, but that's down to the independent forecaster to decide whether the plans will generate enough growth. So you're left with spending cuts, and considerable spending cuts. We don't know exactly how much, but somewhere between a few tens of billions of pounds and several tens of billions of pounds, depending on all those factors that I identified. So that is highly material. You're talking about a spending cut package the size of George Osborne's austerity package in the 2010s, if those numbers are correct. And the choices are either cut back on infrastructure, built environment, roads, buildings, but what will you do in that case with the promises to level up? You also have the possibility of cutting back on departmental spending at a time, post-pandemic, when many our hospitals and schools and courts are doing post-pandemic catch-up, or perhaps during a cost of living crisis, cutting back on benefits and tax credits. So a challenge either way, and it becomes a political challenge.
Faisal, thank you. Let's go back to Birmingham now and speak again to Chris Mason, who's there. So, Chris, when you put all of this together politically, does she have a problem on her hands then within the Conservative ranks?
There's no question, she absolutely does. So people here want her to succeed because her fate is tied to theirs. But there is a deep well of worry here. As one senior figure put it to me, first impressions matter because first impressions are lasting, and the first impressions for many people of the new Prime Minister have been terrible. Now, there are one or two people whispering that the Prime Minister can't survive this, but far more people are saying, no, that would be absurd to try and remove her so soon in office, but they fear that her reputation won't survive this, even if she manages to. In the short term, there is this attempt to try and remove some of the unpopular elements of her budget plans, particularly that tax cut for the richest, with those voices saying it will not pass Parliament. What we'll get from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor as soon as tomorrow when he's on BBC Breakfast and the Today programme is an attempt to reassure, but at the same time to stick to his and her plans, at least for as long as the party will stand them.
Chris, thank you very much. And don't forget, you can keep across all the updates, news and analysis from Chris Mason and from all our other colleagues at the Conservative Party conference on BBC News Online, bbc.co.uk/news, and through the mobile apps as well. Now, memorials are being held in Indonesia after at least 125 people were killed in a stampede at a football stadium. It happened after police fired tear gas at fans who had invaded the pitch in Malang on the island of Java. Our correspondent Valdia Baraputri reports from there. You might find parts of her report distressing.
The night after the tragedy, Indonesian supporters returned to the Kanjuruhan Stadium. Dozens walked around the area holding candles and chanting prayers.
The night ended with a defeat to the home club. Supporters went to the pitch to express their disappointment to players and officials. And then Indonesian police tear gassed the crowd and people ran to the exit, only to find that they were closed.
Tonight, people gathered at the statue of the club mascot, where they put flowers and candles. Adit lost a friend he watched football games with, but he didn't go on that fateful day. He hopes his friend, a father of 2 children, will get justice.
I am in shock. I thought the atmosphere of football games had been getting better, more family-friendly.
Behind me, people are remembering the victims of the tragedy. They pray and put candles at one of the gates that people tried to get out from, but failed.
Cornered and desperate supporters punched the wall to try to get out. More than 100 people died, some here on the scene and many others at the hospital. Valdia Baraputri, BBC News.
NATO's Secretary-General says that the recapture of a town in eastern Ukraine within the territory Russia had just declared it had annexed shows that Ukrainians can push back against Vladimir Putin's forces. The retaking of Liman is a significant gain for Ukraine. It's marked there on the map. But there is a large part of the east and the south of the country, which you can see there in red, which Russia still controls. In Bakhmut, close to the front line, our senior international correspondent Ola Gerin and camera journalist Gökte Karalten have seen just how punishing this war is for Ukrainian soldiers.
At the front line, with the guns in action, the order is run. We reach Ukrainian positions in the city of Bakhmut. We can't say where. But the Russians are close, we are told. Just 400 meters away. Troops are standing their ground here, but in this corner of the Donetsk region, it's tough. Alexander leads the unit and knows the cost of war, not only from fighting his own battles. My brother died, he says, but I don't know where and when exactly, because he was drafted by a different drafting office in a different region. As well as my brother, a few of my comrades died. As battles rage just beyond the building, they deploy one of the key weapons of this conflict. Roman, the drone operator, has become a father since the war began. He has seen his baby son, Kirillo, only once. He's fighting, he says, to stop the Russians committing more atrocities. I don't want them to do what they did in Bucha, he tells me. I lived in Kiev. I understand very well what women feel. If we are weak, they will come for our families. So they defend every inch of territory. We've been hearing plenty of shelling, but not just shelling. There's small arms fire, which suggests that the Russians and the Ukrainians are not far apart. We have to be careful here. We've been told there is a Russian sniper operating from that direction. For the troops here, this is a grind, day and night, a hard battle to hold this position and stop the Russians from pushing into Bakhmut. President Putin claims this is now his, part of the territory he officially annexed on Friday. Soldiers here say he's deluded. The city centre bears the scars of his attacks and echoes to the sounds of his war. Imagine this was your home, torn to pieces. It seems abandoned. Then Ludmila peeks out. A pensioner who cannot walk, defenceless and terrified. She tells us most of her neighbours have gone and the building is leaking. A man was killed in the yard yesterday, she says, but she and her husband don't have money to leave. At the cemetery, on the city's edge, a last goodbye for a loved one. There are plenty of fresh graves here for those killed in recent months. Suddenly, an exchange of shelling. Incoming rounds are getting closer. Neither the dead nor the living are safe here.
Let's go, guys, let's go. Let's go.
Orla Guerin, BBC News, Bakhmut.
A man has died after a shooting in West Belfast this afternoon. Police say that two masked men shot the victim multiple times in the Donegal Celtic FC Social Club before fleeing the scene. Officers have launched a murder investigation and are urging anyone with information to contact them. Votes are being counted in Brazil after a presidential election that could bring about a return to power for a man first elected president 20 years ago. Leftist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has been challenging the incumbent president Jair Bolsonaro, the right-wing current president of Brazil. In his four-year term, he's faced criticism for his handling of the economy, for his handling of the COVID pandemic, and also because there's been a surge in the destruction of the Amazon rainforest in that time, something that Lula is promising to overturn. Brazil's electoral system requires that a candidate win more than 50% of valid votes cast, otherwise the contest goes into a second round. Well, tonight, our South America correspondent Katie Watson joins us from Sao Paulo. How is it looking, Katie?
Well, I'm in the heart of Sao Paulo, Latin America's largest city, and it's the city most closely associated with Lula. In the last few hours, his fans have been gathering below me in expectation of a win. Now, these elections have been billed as the most important elections for Brazil since the country returned to democracy in the 1980s, because the very future of the country's democracy is in question. Jair Bolsonaro, as he cast his vote, said that clean elections need to be respected, and that's the problem. He has long called into question the electronic voting system. He has alleged fraud with no evidence to back it up, but it's a narrative that his supporters agree with. And now, whether it goes to a second round or it's won in the first round in the next hour or so, there's a lot of uncertainty. But what many people are asking is whether Tropical Trump, as Jair Bolsonaro is known, will follow the example of Donald Trump and question the results, or will he accept them peacefully?
Katie Watson in Sao Paulo tonight. Thank you. Now, closer to home, the sport. We've had cricket, the London Marathon and the Manchester Derby. Over to Chetan Pathak at the BBC Sports Centre. Hello, Chetan.
Good evening. We'll start with cricket. England's first tour of Pakistan in 17 years has ended in victory after they beat the hosts by 67 runs to win their T20 series decider in Lahore. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss was watching.
The tightest of series with the most one-sided of endings, but England won't mind that. Under the lights of Lahore, their batters had earlier blazed away.
Oh, he's nailed that.
David Malan set the tone with a swashbuckling 78, although Pakistan's fielders gave them a hefty helping hand.
Ooh, drop catch.
They spilled a string of easy chances for the home fans, just one of those days. And by the time Harry Brook weighed in with a feisty 46, England, like the ball, were almost out of sight. Pakistan's target, 210.
Out.
But amid a clatter of early wickets, they never came close.
Oh, a ball.
And once Reece Topley had sent the bails flying, it was effectively game over. A victorious end to England's first visit to Pakistan in 17 years. And with the T20 World Cup coming up, an even bigger trophy is now in their sights. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Well, next to the Manchester derby in the Premier League, a reminder that Match of the Day 2 is coming up on BBC One. And there were 9 goals at the Etihad Stadium. City beat United 6-3 as Erling Haaland became the first player to score 3 successive Premier League home hat-tricks. His teammate Phil Foden also scored 3 for his first hat-trick for City, who moved back to within a point of the leaders Arsenal. And there were first-time winners in both the men's and women's elite races at today's London Marathon. More than 40,000 runners took part, as our sports correspondent Joe Wilson reports.
You'll know these footballers. Starting line S's. Celebrate the beginning. After this weekend's rail strikes, they were there on time for their hours on London's roads. Watch out for the speed bumps. At the back of this pack, you can spot Yalamzerfia Harlow tripping and falling. Well, she rose. By Buckingham Palace, she'd lost the rest of the field. The Mall has been the setting for such a scope of emotion in recent weeks. Here was a 23-year-old Ethiopian born to run and to win.
She's the champion in London in 2022.
And from Kenya, Amos Kipruto, the men's winner, 2 hours, 4 minutes, 39 seconds in his first London Marathon.
No break.
The men's wheelchair race, Daniel Romanchuk had been waiting for his moment, tucked in, letting the leader Marcel Hoog do the work mile after mile. Now, was that finally a gap?
Oh, no!
Well, Hoog of Switzerland held off the American to win in a course record time. Prize money has risen to record levels for these wheelchair races. This was Catherine de Brunner, another Swiss winner in another course record in the women's event. It looked like spring, and next year the marathon's back to April. Its soul will always lie with fundraising. The British Heart Foundation is this year's official charity. There are so many ways to make progress. For the first time, the London Marathon permitted assisted wheelchairs on the course, so the Kerr family from Northern Ireland could compete here together. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
In golf, England's Charlie Hull has won the Ascendant LPGA in Texas. She shot a final round 64 to finish 1 shot ahead of China's Xiu Lin and win her first LPGA Tour title since 2016. And at the Singapore Grand Prix, it was Red Bull's Sergio Perez who came out on top. He overtook pole sitter Charles Leclerc at the start and led thereafter. Leclerc finished second, with his Ferrari teammate Carlos Sainz third. The championship leader Max Verstappen, though, was 7th, Lewis Hamilton 9th. And that is all your sport from me. Back to you, Mishal.
Chetan, thank you very much. And time now for us to check in with the weather forecast with Thomas Schaffernak. It looked lovely for the marathon runners today.
It did. The rain was just to the south of London, you know, and actually for many of us, it's been quite a tranquil end to the day with clear skies. But I want to show you what's heading our way this week. This is the jet stream here. Watch how the jet stream pushes the weather systems across the UK. Really a lot happening over the Atlantic over the next few days. And then towards the end of the week, the jet stream's blowing right at us and pushing in plenty of showers. Now, I am going to go over that again. I don't expect you to remember all of that. But this is basically the headline. Windy, rain or showers, bit of sunshine in between too. But crucially, it's actually going to stay quite warm in the south. Now, at the moment, it's calm and still because we've got high pressure, which will be with us during the course of Monday. And it will be quite chilly in the southeast in rural spots. I wouldn't be surprised in the southeast and East Anglia if we get to around 2 degrees Celsius early on Monday morning. But a lot of bright weather around both in the morning and the afternoon for England and Wales. But that jet stream is starting to push in the weather systems into Northern Ireland and Western Scotland by the time we get to Monday afternoon. And then through the course of the evening and into Tuesday, that weather front will make a bit more progress into western parts of England and Wales, but clears from Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, the winds will remain southwesterly ahead of that weather front. So look at the temperatures, 20 in London and Norwich and 17 in Belfast. So yes, unsettled and rainy, but it's warm. Now I'm going to concentrate on Wednesday. The weather front is going to spawn a low pressure across the UK. Lots of isobars there, really gusty weather front with gale force winds in coasts, around coasts and inland, but also northern Wales, Cumbria, southwestern Scotland could scoop up 50 to 100 millimetres of rain. And then end of the week, we're back to sunshine and showers. So it's all happening this week, Mishal.
Yes, we would need to get through to the weekend to get all that weather behind us. Thank you very much, Thomas. That's all from us at the BBC News at 10. The news continues on BBC One, though, with our colleagues across the nations and regions and the news where you are. From me, good night.